Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us for today's session hosted by our Gente TMRG. We are doing a fireside chat. We are taking a little mental health break because I, for one, could certainly use it. And we are talking to Dulce. We're going to talk a little bit about her findings as her work has given her some really interesting insights, and then just mental health in general, what you can do to take charge of yours. So without further ado, Dulce, we would love to get to know you. Tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time and energy. I feel that that's our most valuable possessions. So thank you for being here. So I am originally, I was born and raised in Venezuela. I came to Boston after I graduated from high school. The idea was for me to stay here for the summer, learn English, and go back home. But I ended up applying for a scholarship without telling my parents. And fast forward 22 years later, I'm still here. That being said, I am the oldest of four. So I have three sisters. They are triplets. They actually were visiting last week. So because of the situation in Venezuela, I don't know how much you know about the situation in Venezuela. They're pretty much, scattered. So one of them lives in Chile, another one lives in Spain, and there's only one in Venezuela. So it takes a lot of orchestration to have a family reunion. I feel that it takes a lot of orchestration no matter what, even if they live like 3 blocks away, right? So I guess it's just like an extra layer when it's international. On another thing I wanted to tell you about myself is that I'm a mom of two. Yes, yeah. So you know about the situation. Yeah. I have two daughters. They are 6 and 4. They're first generation Latinas here. And it's very interesting for me working a lot as a mental health counselor. That's what I am. So my specialty is working with women of color and from immigrant families on individual therapy, and with group of people of color and from immigrant families like yourself on a group setting. So it's very, very interesting for me to learn and hear about all these dynamics that happen to first generation Latinos, right? Because let alone as a Latina, as an immigrant, but as a mom, I'm like, like it kind of like, it makes me see it from a different perspective. So that's a little bit about myself, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, no, that's a great background. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's a complex situation right now in Venezuela. So I'm glad you and your sisters are safe and we're able to get together. It's so important to make the time and space for that. So, so you landed in Boston to learn, ended up staying here in the US. As far as your professional background, what made you decide to focus your work on the mental health of specifically, immigrants, women of color?
Yeah, so I think ever since I was, I don't know how old, early on, I knew I wanted to study psychology. So I was that person that, if I was in the middle of the street, the random person came to me and tell me like their life story, right? Like I was that person. And then when I told my parents that that's what I wanted to do, psychology wasn't a major in my hometown. So I'm from a town called San Cristobal, which is in the borderline with Colombia. And they were like, nope, like we don't have it as a major. Back then, it's not as common in many Latin American countries for you to go somewhere else to study. It happens, but it's not as common. Most people stay in their hometown and, study something available in their hometown. So they were like, yeah, like, why don't you try to see what else is here? So I ended up applying to go to school to study communications. But I knew that's not really my first choice. So when I came here and I got my scholarship, I ended up studying psychology. And then very organically, what happened was that because Spanish is my first language, working in community mental health, I ended up working with immigrants, right? And people that didn't speak Spanish. And I saw there was a very high demand. There's always been a very high demand for Spanish-speaking therapists. And it's interesting because, on one hand, I always think to myself, there's so many of us that speak Spanish, and yet the demand is so high. So it was very organic how it happens, but then I realized, being a client myself, a client, of therapy that has had different therapists over the years, I realized how important it was for me to work with a Latina immigrant therapist. What a big difference that made for me as a client. Not having to spend half an hour explaining why it was so important that I, walk away from a family dinner, right? And then having like 5 minutes of actual therapy. So it was kind of like putting those two elements together, my cultural background, more than language itself, because I really don't speak English with many of my clients, but it's that cultural background and understanding. And I think feeling and knowing what I do the best and what I like to do the most. So it was kind of like putting those pieces together.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I definitely see a need for resources in languages other than English. So that makes a lot of sense. And especially something as vulnerable as therapy, right? Being able to speak in the language you're most comfortable in is huge, and having those cultural ties is really important to just having context around the conversation. So that makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the common challenges your clients are facing due to those cultural backgrounds, upbringings? What do you see are some of their kind of major things that you work through, and how does that help them?
Yeah, I would love, thank you. Yes. Thank you, Samantha. So Samantha said that there's a little bit of background noise. So I would love to hear from you in the chat what you think, if you identify, if you feel comfortable, of course. But it's very interesting because I work with on individual therapy, very, like strong woman, successful. So when you look at this woman from the outside, it might look like they have everything together, right? And yet many of them, they feel like they do not belong, which it's one thing that can happen to us when we feel that we're like kind of in the middle of two different cultures, right? One, I'm very visual, so I'm going to use maybe a few metaphors. Let me know if that resonates or not. But something that I was thinking the other day was, when you breathe in, and we do this all the time, right? Like we do it without really thinking about it, but we breathe in and then there's a pause and then we breathe out. And it feels that many of the people I work with live in that pause. So they don't feel that they're part of the inhale, whatever that is for you, and they don't feel that they're part of the exhale, whatever that is for you. It's like you live in that little space that's yours and that you make yours, but you don't feel like you quite belong here or there. Maybe because you don't speak Spanish as well, or maybe because you're not Black enough or white enough or whatever it is enough, right? So feeling that you don't belong. it's one that I constantly see with the people I work with. Another one is feeling guilty. Guilt is, and I don't know if any of you relate. I relate to many of these things. That's another part, right? Like being an immigrant myself, being Latina myself, being all these things, which I feel that I have a lot of commonalities with the people I work with. So it's guilt about almost everything and anything, if that makes sense. Guilt about having more than people around you, guilt about those sacrifices that people make for you. So guilt about everything, right? Does that make sense so far?
That definitely resonates with me, being here and having family members elsewhere where there's maybe not as many resources, you know, being too far to really help with some of the more tactical day-to-day struggles. And just being separated is hard, but yeah, it's almost like a survivor's guilt that sometimes occurs.
Yes. So that's one. That's another one. And I think it's interesting because the way I think of this is some of them are so intertwined with each other that it's hard to separate and look at them individually. But another one is feeling like you don't deserve.
Yeah.
And this goes like hand in hand with imposter syndrome, right? And like, you know, like just yeah, no, it's not coming from my side.
Okay.
I have headphones. Yeah, it actually sounds like a different language.
I got it.
Okay, great, thank you. But so many of them, again, it's kind of like it feels like they're on like intertwined, so it's hard to separate some of them. And I want to make clear, like this common challenges, many people have them, but yet they have a different flavor when we're talking about the cultural background. So feeling like you don't deserve, or imposter syndrome, is, you know, when you have that voice that tells you you're not good enough, right? Or, you know what, that was luck. Or like that constant feeling, like I've heard this in a podcast, and it was like almost like a little painful because of how hard it resonated. But it said feeling like that feeling that you walk into the back door while everyone else walking to the front door. So, you know, like, again, it's like you don't deserve it, right? And it's almost like the promotion is almost there, whatever it is, it's almost there. And yet there's a part of you that cannot even enjoy it. Or maybe there's a part of you, like, because of that self-sabotage, you're not gonna even, you know, give yourself the permission to actually get to experience it because you feel like you don't deserve it. And again, this is connected to the link to the guilt and feeling that you don't belong, but it's almost like a different one, right? Please let me know if you have any comments or questions about this. Another one, and this is big, is difficulties setting boundaries. And this one, I see so many versions of this, but I do think that many of us struggle with it because we did not see it growing up. It's something that we don't know as adults, we don't know how to do it. And then when we try to do it, many times the response we get from people around us is not the best, right? Like they're like, what is wrong with you? You're being selfish. You're not thinking, like, you don't love me. You're not thinking of your family, or whatever else it might be going on. But it might feel that you're going against everyone, you know, when you're trying to set boundaries, even if ultimately you're modeling to them, you know what, like this, you can do this too. Like this is this is something that you can do as well. And all of these things, like the feeling like you don't belong, feeling guilty, feeling like you don't deserve, difficulty setting boundaries. I feel that all of this makes it so hard for us to think of ourselves first, right? Like that, everything that we hear when we get into an airplane, and yes, it's a cliche, but it's so good that we keep using it, right? Culturally, it can be really, really, really difficult to put yourself first because of all these challenges. What do you think? Do any of you relate? Does this make sense? I feel that I have a little bit of all of them, but
No, 100%. 100%. It's so interesting. It's like everything you bring up, I'm like, yep, check. Yep, that also. And sometimes you don't even realize it's so subconscious.
oh yeah,
Me, that you don't realize that when you hear it out loud, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly, there's that mirror. There's those words that I didn't even realize were kind of sitting there.
yeah. And I would say, Pilar, and I know, we would need more time to dig into this, but if we want to dig even a little deeper, there's intergenerational trauma, right? That many of us have. And because of that normalization, right? Like when you grow up around it, you don't know that's not, how things are quote unquote supposed to be. So we don't know that's not normal, and we get used to it, and we tolerate it. We make our lives around it, and yet it can be very unhealthy. So many of the people I work with have some type of intergenerational trauma, or like, I know that word can create a lot of resistance, but another way to look at it is those family loyalties that are not good to us, right? That we keep carrying on with us.
Yeah, Dulce, I wanna you touching, right? You're speaking and I'm reflecting. And one thing that I would like to touch as well is that on that cultural pull that ends up happening, I have a very similar background of yours. I came here to study, end up staying, right? And then now with my family back home, there's almost like I've learned new things. I've gotten new experiences, right? I've learned to value different things, right? And then now there's almost like these canyon being built, right? That I need to be cognizant of because they stayed behind.
Mm.
They have stayed true to some of the things that they still practice that has not changed for them, right? And this can create a bit of conflict as a Latino living in the US and then interacting, especially Zoom and whatnot, and visiting family, right? I wonder if you can expand on that, if that's a common thing as well, like almost like that cultural drift, if you will, if I can. I think that's the best way I can explain it, that happens with immigrants.
Absolutely. Can I answer this now, Pilar?
Absolutely. Yes, go for it. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, Hugo, by the way, you're asking me this right after a very big family reunion. So, like on a personal level, it's like, okay, I can answer Hugo, right? Like I can I can talk about this, but that's the reality, right? Like it's someone was asking me this morning, and this is personal, and I hope it's okay with you. Please tell me if you feel comfortable with me sharing, but someone asked me, how are you? And I was like, you know what? I'm disappointed. And it's okay for me to say it, right? Because sometimes we don't even give ourselves permission to say that because they're our family, and because, how is the saying goes? La ropa sucia se lava en la casa, something like that, right? Like, yeah, it's like, no, like, and then, it was like, no, I am disappointed because I was expecting something else, and maybe that was naive for me or whatever it was, like maybe I was romanticizing it. But yes, I am sad and I am disappointed. And then, that leads me a little bit, or what I'm thinking of, it's, have you heard of the concept of code switching? So basically, I know that some of you are nodding. So basically code switching, it's like this, the way I see it is a coping mechanism. And it's something we do all the time. And many times we do it. It's not that we decide, that we say, okay, I'm going to code switch now. But it's that constant change that keeps happening between how you interact, like here, and how you interact with your family, and we do this constantly, right? And the way I see it is a coping mechanism, because it's like almost like knowing that you can act differently, right? Like knowing, and then, a part of me, and I understand if that leads into questions about, but what about authenticity? Okay, please, like, this is where my accent comes out, so I struggle with that word. But but what about being authentic? And isn't that, like, are you being true to yourself? And I think, like, one thing that I often remind people, right? Because sometimes one of the questions is, especially when there's a lot of resistance about therapy, right? Which we know there's a big stigma, and therapy, unfortunately, is not as well received in many Latinx families, Latino families. So I tell people there's different things we can do, right? On one hand is showing them what's possible by example. So when they see that you're doing better, when they see that you're happier, or that you're like having all of this results, you're showing them that it is possible. On the other hand, you can spend a lot of time and energy trying to convince them of something that it's not possible for them. So it's almost like this fork, and there's a point where you have to make a decision of how much time and energy do you want to put into this. And I know this might not be the best comparison, Ugo, but I think that something similar happens when you decide how much time and energy are you going to put into this, knowing that you're not going to make them change, and that's okay, right? And there's a lot of acceptance that goes into it. But I do think that almost like the foundation, when I think of it, it's like the foundation of all of this work is compassion and self-compassion. Because when we do this work and we really take a closer look, most likely we're going to find out many things that we don't like. And it's really easy to blame and judge, but having compassion for others, knowing that they were doing their best with the resources they had, it's so important. And also compassion towards ourselves, right? Because there might be a lot of guilt, there might be a lot of, I wish I knew this sooner, and I could have lived a different life, and I could have. So practicing and having self-compassion with ourselves too, it's so important, so important. And also knowing that we don't have to do it by ourselves, right? That's another part of that can be a cultural component. Like, I can do everything, and I'm strong, and I have 3 jobs, and I have a house clean, and my laundry, which is not true, by the way, but like, like this, like, I can do everything. But knowing that you can ask for help, like you don't have to, we don't have to have all the answers when it comes to this. I don't know if I answered your question, no, but I feel that I was a little all over the place. Okay.
No, the key thing for me that I heard from you that I've been struggling with, I think, is the compassion part towards everybody else, and then yourself.
Especially towards yourself.
Yeah, we're all coming from different places, right? And understanding that it's not our job, it's not the goal to change anybody, right? We can only control ourselves and how you react to it, and then choose to react and lead with kindness, compassion, and understanding, right?
And that can be also another cultural component, because when you grow up thinking that you have to take care of everyone, right? Like you have to put everyone's needs before your own. That can create conflict when you're saying like, wait a minute, no, I don't need to take care of this. That's not my responsibility. I cannot make them change. So there's a lot that goes into that. Yeah.
Thank
You
you.
know, you know, with listening to Dulce and Hugo, one of the things that really also resonated with me is that I feel guilty for being here, right? And my family's still abroad. And I feel very guilty that at times that I don't even post on social media what I do anymore,
Oh.
because I feel like it's just creating that additional rift. Right? Like, oh, look at me. I went to a concert, or, you know, I bought a pair of, you know, jeans or whatever, right? Or I'm going on vacation with my family. I don't post anymore because I feel like I'm being judged, but I made my own decisions. And, you know, I don't want to stop living and not sharing, but it's a hard balance. It really is for me.
Absolutely.
You nailed it, Marina. One thing that it always comes to my mind for some reason, a long time ago, my sister had she has a sister-in-law that was having twins, right? All Latinos are probably going to relate to this. And then I'm going back home for Christmas, and my sister phones me and says, oh, hey, could you please bring this item like with you? Because there's like the import taxes stuff and you know how expensive, everybody's shaking their heads here, right? And then she's like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. It's just like a double, like a twin stroller. It was like, whoa, wait a minute, my sister, I love you. And by definition, I love your extended family, but I'm traveling on business. There's no way that I'm gonna try to, you know, bring with me a double, like a twin stroller on an airplane on a business trip, right? Like I gotta draw a line somewhere. And then I did, and then it felt good because I really didn't want to deal with that on top of business, right? Taking care of business and whatnot. And then for a while I felt guilty, right? Because I said no. But then I figured that was the right thing to do for me and for my relationship, because if you don't draw those lines, you end up giving too much of yourself, right?
Absolutely.
I use that as an example.
That's a great example. And that's definitely a skill set I need to build. The boundaries, saying no. Oh, the first time I said no to my mom, oof, that was hard. But some of these requests, to your point, Hugo, are not very reasonable. And it's hard to then think, wait, what do I actually need? Does this actually work for me? What kind of repercussions is it going to have for me? And not just me now, but my family as well, right? To like rearrange schedules and redo all these things. And yes, so it's good to hear that others are also feeling the same way about that. Yeah.
And it's a skill, right? Like it's the type of thing, the more we practice it, I wouldn't say it gets easier, but you notice what works for you. And also people need to hear it, because the first time it's like, oh wait, like that must have been a mistake. Like what, Hugo cannot bring like the twin stroller, let me ask him again, like maybe he misunderstood or whatever the case is, right? So it's like a practice. So you train not only yourself, but you train others that no, this has changed. And in order for that to happen, you need to be consistent, which is the hard part.
Absolutely. No, just like any skill, it needs practice. So as hard as it is, I am trying to practice. And I'm seeing some great comments in the chat. Thank you for coming in around the barriers, that language.
Oh, the language,
Bring to the table. It's really challenging on both sides of the house, right? Communication is hard enough as it is, and having this extra nuance is tricky. So thanks for all the comments, everyone. I have one more question, and then I'll turn it over to some questions that are in the AMA doc, because I want to make sure that if anyone does have anything that pops up also, that we can just have an open conversation here towards the end. So we've talked about a lot of different challenges, some good kind of tips around those challenges. So I just wanted to ask, just, knowing that there's a larger group, that we're all human, we're all struggling with our mental health every day in these very stressful times that we've been living through. Do you have any just practical daily pieces of advice that you can give to our team who just want to do a better job of looking after their personal mental health?
Yeah, so I'm gonna say a few things, and please know that the most important thing is how can you make it your own, right? Like how you can, because sometimes, I don't know, like you might hear of people that wake up at 5 a.m. and, and that works extremely good for them. But maybe if you try to wake up every day at 5 a.m, you'll be miserable. So first of all, what works for you, adapt it, translate it, do whatever you need to do. You know yourself the best. So that being said, how can you connect with yourself, right? And what I mean by that is, how can you have some silence? How can you have that space where you can listen to yourself, maybe through meditation, for those of you that pray, through prayer, through exercise. So the avenue can be different, but how can you reach to that destination where you feel that you have connected with yourself? And maybe a way to do this is taking pauses, which is also so important, especially when we have this very fast-paced day, right, or environment or work life. It seems to me that after COVID, it's almost like faster, like everything is faster, right? Like, I don't know, like before when you were in person and you got to a meeting 2 minutes late, you did not apologize. But now when you get to Zoom 1.5 minutes late, it's like, I'm so sorry, I'm late, right? Like, so how can you take pauses? And I know that sometimes that's hard. So how can you intentionally make space for those pauses, right? Like maybe like throughout meetings, can you move them around? Can you actually take a lunch break? Can you go out and take a walk, but intentionally putting it into your calendar if you have to. Another thing is, how can you set boundaries, right? We were talking about it earlier, but if we look at boundaries from a different perspective, from the perspective of self-care, how can you plug them in? And this can be boundaries with others, but most importantly, boundaries with yourself. Many of us were working from home, and maybe we're working, or some days we end up working longer hours. So it doesn't have to be like super special. It can be, setting an alarm at 5 and reminding yourself, you know what, it's time to like finish. So that type of boundaries, right? We do not have much time. We were talking about how time is precious, it's valuable. So when we say make time for yourself, sometimes that looks challenging. So one thing I would invite you to do, and I know it can sound a little, I don't know, like out there when you first hear about it, is how can you use what you already have and make the best out of it? So the way I like to call it is ritualizing your routines. So we all have some routines, things that we do all the time. How can you make a ritual out of it, right? When you were talking about connecting with yourself, taking pauses, Sometimes that might look into, when you're having that coffee or that tea, setting up an intention to start out the day, or when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, visualizing what would be the best version of today. Or those things that you're already doing, can you add up some intentionality? Another thing is, how am I doing, Pilar? Too many things or no?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm diligently typing away because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I'll take all the advice I can get. So
Okay, I have two more things. Gratitude. So the thing with gratitude, when you make pasta and you drain the pasta and you like let all the water, go, and you the result is that you have the pasta. With gratitude, it's kind of the same. When you practice gratitude, you're forcing yourself, just by saying, I'm gonna practice gratitude, you're already making the decision of letting all the negative things sleep away, and you're concentrated on the positive. That would be the pasta, right? So that's why gratitude is so powerful. So maybe ending your day practicing gratitude. And I would say, if possible, when possible, I know that's not always the case, but not just thinking about it, because we get so easily distracted. So if Pilar asked me a question and I was in the middle of thinking about 3 things I'm grateful for, maybe like I lost focus and that's it. But actually write it down. When we write it down, we're more likely to finish the sentence or like to go back to it. So practicing gratitude, we actually have a family gratitude journal. And it's very interesting what 6 and 4 years old are grateful for. So it can be, even adding some humor into your life from that perspective. And the last one, and I think one that is very challenging for many of us, asking for help. This can look like, the way I'm thinking about help is all around, like one type of help can be therapy. Another type of help can be a babysitter. Another type of help can be someone that cleans your house. Another type of help can be deciding to take your clothes to the dry cleaner today because of whatever reason. Or ordering takeout. So what type of help do you need, and can you give yourself permission to get that help and to ask for that help without assuming that people should already know? That's another thing that sometimes we do, right? So asking for help without filters, which I know that it's hard because it puts that in a very vulnerable position.
100%. That is another skill that I, for one, could definitely use back on. And I have to say, I've been getting better at it.
Good.
When you get outnumbered by kids, all of a sudden it's easier to flex that muscle. I'll put it that way. Okay, let's get into some of these team member questions. Thank you everyone for—
That is not easy. Sorry, Pilar, I was reading the comments out loud.
Yeah. No worries, no worries. Yeah, thank you again for all the chat comments. Our first question is from Isabel. And Isabel, I see you're on the call. Would you like to verbalize your question?
Sure. So I'm still in my native country and thinking about moving internationally in the coming year. What advice would you give someone to prepare them to be like, okay, you're going to be in a new culture. What can I do in advance now to make this process easier for being in a new culture, being separated from family and community? A lot of the points you've kind of talked about today are about the impact that these things have on people. What can people do in advance to try and minimize that and make their lives as pleasant as possible?
Oh, Isabel, that's such a good question. I would say practicing self-compassion, or like familiarizing yourself with it. When people ask me, Dulce, what type of therapy do you practice, or what type of therapeutic approach, and I know that self-compassion, it's not an approach or a therapeutic, it's not a theory, right? I do think it's one thing that can help us in so many ways. That being said, I'm not sure if you already know someone where you're moving to, but it can be isolating, right? Like it can be challenging. So creating community, I think it's so important. And what I mean by community is, people that you can really feel comfortable around, people that you can trust, people that you can turn to, and use that community, right? So that takes it back to asking for help. Can you let them know what you need? And can you be, I do think that sometimes, going back to what we were talking with Hugo earlier, right? Like when someone asked me this morning, how are you doing, right? Maybe, especially at the beginning, I would encourage you to be honest with yourself. So if you call a friend that is back in your in whatever you used to leave, many people want to protect us, right? Like the people that love us usually want to protect us. So something that can happen and that I see happening is when you try to tell them, it's like, oh, don't worry about it, it's gonna get better, you're awesome, people are gonna love you, you're gonna have friends in no time. Like it's almost like they want to come up with all these solutions, and they don't make space for you to tell them. So I would encourage you, and I know that you cannot do this with everyone, but even when you need to, start out the conversation by saying something like, and you don't have to quote me because I know that you're going to do it in your own wonderful way, but listen, like, Isabel, I just want you to know that all I need for you right now is to listen to me. That's all I need. Which is hard, right? But almost like taking away that responsibility of your friends, loved ones, family to make it right for you, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is, can you very intentionally incorporate play in the process? Because when we talked about moving, right, like, and let alone a different country, like there's so many practicalities and so many big things that that go with it, and that are part of it. But can you add play, whatever that means to you? If that means, I don't know, like taking a dance lesson, that could be a great way to meet people and fun people, for that fact. Or if it is like meeting or whatever it might be, but can you make sure to add something for you that has nothing to do with all the more, I don't want to say serious stuff, but all these things that you have to take care of regardless. I don't know if anyone else has some other tips for Isabel, because that's a big thing.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. And don't forget, everyone, you can always participate asynchronously as well if you have any thoughts you want to drop in the notes. In the interest of time, I see we've got another couple great questions here. I want to make sure we get to them. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second one from Victor. And I see, Victor, you're still on the call. Did you want to verbalize your question for Dulce?
Sure, thanks. I'm coming from a bit other end of the world right now, which means that I'm hosting some refugees from Ukraine. And my question is kind of a simple sentence, but a complex problem. How would you try to handle the life with the war? To give you the most recent example was, we were having dinner yesterday with the family, and suddenly the wife came and showed her phone to the husband, showing the bomb rocketing of Kharkiv, their hometown, and they try to figure out whether, given the lights that light up, which part of the city is being bombarded, so to know what's happening at home. And basically I have two sub questions on this topic. One is that what would be your advice to help them the most to deal with the impacts of the war? And the other is how to help myself, because sometimes it's not easy, even just to be beside them.
Oh, Victor, I have to be honest, I don't know how you can help them with what's happening with the war. Like that's absolute, like that's trauma, right? Like that's and it's trauma for them, it's trauma for you. I'm so glad that you added the other question of what can I do for myself, because what I was thinking as I've heard you is I hope you're finding ways to take care of yourself, right? Like I hope you're finding ways to put on your own oxygen mask, so you can continue doing what you need to do. I'm a big advocate when it comes to therapy, of course, but there's other ways. So I would say for you, what can you do to take care of yourself? And I would say, can you be selfish? And I know that's, that word in general has a very negative connotation, right? Like when we like so many of us, don't be selfish. But what I mean by that is, can you think of yourself first? Can you think of how can you meet your needs first and foremost? Now, when it comes to what do they need, my specialty is I've worked with complex trauma, but never with people in active war, right? Like I work with a lot of refugees or people that have come from, places where there's been a lot of violence. But something that sometimes we forget, right, is that for so many of those people, what they're going through, it's so traumatic and so big that it almost like, there's very specific needs that need to be met at that moment. And that can be something like figuring out, where their kid will go to school, or figuring out, their shoes that they gave them are too small and they need bigger shoes. And that's what they can focus on. And maybe emotionally and mentally, that's what they have the capacity to resolve at that moment. And as outsiders, sometimes we tend to think, oh, I need to help them process this, and this. But maybe it's not the right time, right? Like maybe at that moment, what they need might be like, maybe they're looking at it from the magnifier glass or like microscope, if that makes sense. But I would say look for help for yourself, think of yourself first, and don't think that's being selfish. If anything, would be the opposite.
Thanks for the advice.
Thanks so much for the question, Victor. And I know we're at time, but for those that are able to stay on a little longer, Leo, you put a question in here as well, and I see you're still on. Would you like to verbalize?
Sure. Hi, Dulce. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm also come from Venezuela. I was born there and migrated to here to South Florida as well. And there's a couple of us here from Venezuela as well. So happy to have you. My question was more around, I constantly have a feeling at the end of the day that you have not accomplished all of your goals. Like you weren't as productive as you could have been. And I wanted to know if that's a normal feeling, or is that something that maybe I need to work on? And what is, because I always, you always want to have something to help you progress, to incentivize you, but how much is good and how much is not good?
Leo, so I'm laughing, or I'm smiling, I'm not laughing, because this is something that I personally struggle with so much, and so many of the people I work with struggle with so much that I came up with this online tool called Remember You're Already Doing Enough. And it's this feeling, right? Like no matter how much you do, it's never enough. And that leads into, I don't know if it's your case, Leo, but for so many of the people I work with, having that feeling in a way limits you from really celebrating what you have accomplished, because it's like, yeah, like it's like that happened, but whatever, right? Like, so I do think it's very common, and I think that it's partly, or like is a result of some of those other common challenges that we were talking about. And many times it's also the result of trying to overcompensate when we get to some places. Especially what I've seen is those moments where you have that big promotion or whatever that is, and you don't see other people like yourself, and the you did not deserve this, the imposter syndrome, like that voice starts to get loud. We might try to overcompensate by always doing more, almost like to prove many times ourselves. Really, that's when it gets dangerous, right? You were like, your question was like, okay, is this normal? When, like, what to do about it? I would say when it gets to the point where your daily life it's being affected, maybe when it gets to the point where your relationships are being affected, where your physical health is being affected because of how much you're expecting from yourself, it gets that's a sign that maybe something needs to change. But I do think that it happens to so many of us. I know that you're getting some comments in the chat, and I don't know who else relates to it, but I completely relate to it. And I actually I don't have it with me right now, but even like I use visual reminders, right? Like that says, remember, you're already doing enough. So even like little things like that can help.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Leo, and thanks for those tips, Dulce. Visual reminders, that's a good one. Or even, I think I heard on a separate call, like whenever you get a shout out at work, or, in the thanks channel, or when someone pays you a compliment, like collecting those, keep those in a running Google Doc, right? Then you can go back and look and remember, oh yeah, it's not just me, thinking these things. There's other people that are really with me, and I am doing enough. So that's a great question. Okay, so I know we are a little over time. Were there any other questions that are not in the doc that folks wanted to ask before I ask one final question?
So Pilar, I just wanted to kind of chime in a little bit, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So Dulce, I was actually driving and listening to the beginning of a lot of the conversation. A lot of things just resonated with me. So I'm Puerto Rican and Mexican. And I think for me, one of the things, the challenges that I've had in just overall workplace, schooling, and everything that's gone on is that I'm not viewed as Latina. I remember being in college, and I think the group was called Mecha back then, and I tried to sign up, and they were like, oh, you're at the wrong table. You should be at the Black Student Union table. So there were a lot of things that I think even just in the workplace that have been tough in that sense, because visually people still recognize me, even though my last name's Cartagena, right? So it's like Cartagena, but they'll pronounce it like Cartagena or that kind of thing. So I guess my question to you is, like, are we as a society in a place of kind of like understanding that Latinos are not just light skinned or a certain, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, we're such a variety of colors and skin tones and height and weight, everything in all encompassed in one. And the reason I ask this question is because my children resemble me, and my daughter speaks Spanish. And, her hair is a bit curlier and a little bit kinkier, but it's kind of like still, she's put in that bucket of, she's Black, but she's not. So, those are the things that are a bit challenging. And I feel like I've kind of overcome a lot of things in the past, but I think in looking into the future, I'm trying to prepare my daughter for those type of situations in the workforce and society, just kind of understanding to be confident in who she is as a female.
Yeah.
Will probably be recognized as a Black female and not Latina, because I'm not sure. She's 11, right? Things may change by the time she's older. But I guess I just want to kind of understand, like, from your perspective, like, as a society, where are we with this? Like, where are people still kind of like, even in the culture, like, my family was like, morenita, estás bonita, morenita kind of thing. And it's just kind of like, wow, why can't I just be, a certain, so again, just going back to those, I recently went to a doctor appointment and he was Cuban and he goes, oh, you're a Black Latina. So but these are all things that I think we're still in a society need to overcome. I'm comfortable in my own skin. It's just that I feel other people are not sure where to put me, right? Or kind of understand. And when you were talking about that gray area, my mom is Mexican, and so I speak Spanish. And when people hear me speak Spanish, it's like, whoa, but you don't have an accent. And it's like, wait a minute. So, I'm sorry, I'm throwing a lot at you at the same time. Listening to the conversation. I have feeling that guilt, like you said, of, my mom remarried. My father was Puerto Rican, passed away, but my mom remarried my father, which was actually an immigrant that worked fields. So I lived in Central California. I even worked with immigrant children. My mom had the time the resources at the time to send me to a private school, which was then all Anglo, right? All white. So I'm in first grade and my friend says, you're a child, you don't think about color. And she calls me the N-word. And I'm like, what? And that's the first time I kind of, like, as a child. So there are a lot of traumatic moments that I think I've kind of recognized, understand now as an adult, kind of understand how people think just from my own experiences. But again, just understanding where society is right now, sometimes it's a bit discouraging.
Yeah. Oh, Lisa, well, thank you so much for sharing that. So I want to believe that at least we're talking more about it, right? Like that's what I want to believe. And I'm going to give you, would it be okay if I share 2 resources really quickly, Pilar? So two things I want to give you. One is there's a book. It's called Uncolonized Latinas by Valeria Aloe. I'm going to write it in the chat. She is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for those of you that are saying bye. But she talks about colorism. And she talks about how we don't see it, right? Like as a privilege, like those of us that are white Latinas, and how we need to talk about it, right? So that's a wonderful resource. Another one, I don't know if you've heard the podcast. That's why I'm saying I feel that we're having more conversations about it. But at the same time, I do think that we have the responsibility of continue having those conversations and spreading those conversations that we think are good about it. There's a podcast called Hello Latina, and she had the diversity and inclusion president or vice president of LinkedIn, who is an Afro-Latina, and she's gay and she's Dominican, and she was wonderful. So I do think that we're having more conversations about it, but it definitely needs it needs more work. And I do think that also recognizing that you're not alone, right? Like that, which I feel it's such a big, from Puerto Rico. Thank you, Alejandro. Not from the Dominican Republic, but I do think that many of us, we feel better when we know, oh wait, that's not just me, right? Like that's the healing power of groups. So that's not to say that I'm not comparing your experience to anyone else's, but I do think that having these conversations and listening to these experiences can be so powerful. So those are 2 things that I can think of. But I want to think that that at least there are these conversations, because to be honest with you, I don't remember having or listening to these conversations 5, 6, 4 years ago, right? So it makes me hopeful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah, these are great. And thank you. There's some comments in here around the common thread of the human element. I love that, Sandra. So thank you for adding that comment in our note stock. And I know we are fully over time. Thank you for being so generous with yours, Dulce. Thank you for everyone who hung on past time. We'll be sure to share these notes. And the last question I had, we can do asynchronously. So I'll send it to you via email. And thank you again, everyone. I'll get the recording up as well for those who were unable to join. Be well, take care, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.